important than selling the product to a customer or the company to an investor. Okay, it's really important that you think about that, because when you're in a situation, like for example tonight, you've got a great opportunity of networking later. It's one of the reasons why you're all here. We've already seen that from Slido. Is there's an opportunist situation where you'll be able to potentially meet your next employee or your next business partner. So you've got to always have your employee pitch deck ready to make sure that you are ready to pitch the company to that potential employee. The idea is to focus on obviously creating an environment so compelling to the potential employee and a culture very strong and very articulate, very transparent, that you and your staff that work for you become a walking billboard and create that gravity in order to bring potential new employees into the business. But obviously, when we're talking about values and we're talking about mission statements, it's important that you understand the difference between the two. So, I personally like Brian Chesky, from the CEO of Airbnb. He does a great job of talking publicly about the Airbnb culture. Yeah, and he was involved in the first 300 hires at Airbnb, and since then, because he knew that it was really important to be involved in that process at the early stage, because those early people were going to be the ones that resonate the culture down like a triangle, if you like. And so the idea is, as a founder, is you talk publicly about your culture a lot. You do lots of events, and you talk about very articulately about what it's like to work for your company and the values, and some examples of those creates gravity within your company, and that's really, really important. Now, Amazon, but it's really important, before we go into this, it's really important to understand the difference between the vision and the sort of value proposition and the vision or mission statement with the values of the company. So a vision or mission statement, if you like, this is Amazon's, for example. Okay, this just tells you it wants to be the most customer-centric business, right? But it doesn't tell you anything about what it's like to work for Amazon or help you on a day-to-day basis in terms of how you behave or how making you a good Amazonian will be. So values describe what the guiding principles are to what it's like to work for your company. Okay, some people have 4 values, some people have lots. Okay, and our values actually are described in our leadership principles. Hands up who's seen these before, heard of these before, or even used these, or something similar before. Okay, so we have quite a lot of leadership principles, right? We have 14, and these have been developed and evolved over a long period of time. So I'm not expecting, startup founders to come and sort of take these and actually plug them in into their own culture. 14 is a lot, all right? But some firms do have mission statements that are very sort of aspirational, right? And, very, very, but they don't really resonate with you on a day-to-day basis. They don't give you this sort of day-to-day kind of feel and love about how you're going to behave and how you're going to do well working for the company. So, but Amazon, everyone lives these leadership principles, right? So they're a shared vocabulary. So if someone delivers fantastic results, then we say, great deliver results, or they've been customer obsessed, great customer obsession, or bias for action. We live and breathe these leadership principles, and they are used as a shared vocabulary. And of course, they're authentic, and they're really a guide to how or what good behavior looks like within the business. And we use them across the board, everything from hiring, which we're talking about today, to performance management and all those kind of things. What's interesting is we do have one of the leadership principles I like to call out, which is one of the quirky things I think about Amazon, is backbone, disagree, and commit. And one of the things that I like about that is that we are expected to have a little bit of backbone to push back on decisions that leadership make about anything that they make, right? But you better be sure that you have the right data in order to back up your argument, and a lot of evidence as well to make sure that whatever the decision's made is not good for customers, right? It's not a good thing, put it that way. But you're almost expected to do that. Okay, it's really good that you have that sort of culture in pushing back. But make no mistake, if the decision doesn't go your way, then you get on board. That's the commit side. Right? You commit to the decision, you get on board, and you get on with it. okay? That's one of the most important things. So from the start, Amazon's always intended to hire the best people. And here is a quote well, that's not the quote. This is a quote that I'm going to say, which is from our leadership principle, okay? So we've all got definitions of hire and develop the best. So leaders raise their performance bar with every hire and promotion. They recognize exceptional talent and willingly move them throughout the organization. So we're talking about, hiring great people when they're coming in, but then seeing the opportunity of individuals to make sure that they're able to move throughout the business. Okay, so that's an important thing. And we'll come back to that in a minute, because I think it's an important one when we do the hiring process. Talk a little bit about how we make that decision when we hire an individual, or we make a decision on hiring an individual. So unique to Amazon, we have what we call the Bar Raiser program, which has been around since '97. And what a Bar Raiser is an objective third-party individual in the interview process that ensures the best long-term hires for the company, okay? So it was created to balance the power of decision-making and counterbalance the hiring manager's decision-making process. But what we mean by that is sometimes, or hands up, we've seen like a third of the room, half of the room have a mishire, so that you've basically made the wrong decision at that point. So the whole point of a Bar Raiser is that we don't make the wrong decision. We don't make a hiring decision based on absolute necessity and basically make mistake at that point in time. So that is the whole point of it, is to have that person to say, hang on a minute, you desperately need somebody, but is this the right person to hire? Okay, it's that third-party objector and is the gatekeeper of the hiring bar. So that's what the Bar Raiser does, okay? The Bar Raiser and hiring manager do need to agree on a hire, and if in certain circumstances, okay, the Bar Raiser doesn't agree that if the hiring manager wants to hire and the Bar Raiser doesn't agree, then we don't hire. So the Bar Raiser is a really powerful role within the business, and there's really no getting around it, okay? There's no escalation allowed or anything like that. It is part and parcel of the hiring process, is to make sure that we continue to raise the bar and we don't hire for the sake of it. So let's look at a little bit of our hiring process at Amazon. So this is like roughly what it looks like. So we tend to do phone screens. I think it's probably quite a common thing in most companies, is that you have a phone call or a phone screen just to kind of do a high-level chat or a screen to determine functional fit of the role. Have you got the right kind of experience? Do you loosely have traits that can fit the Amazon culture and the leadership principles? They're generally bespoke and designed specifically for the role per se. So we're trying to qualify in or out at the early stages of the interview process, whether the candidate is a good fit both for Amazon, but also raising the bar from a functional fit perspective. Can they hit the ground running? Those kind of things. More on that later. But sometimes we have one, sometimes we have two phone screens, but then we have the written exercise, which is a really important thing. So at Amazon, writing is a really, really important thing. So we write everything down in things like called narratives, which is where you effectively write a business plan. This session isn't going to go into too much detail around that, but what it does do is allow us to test whether people are good at writing. Very articulate ways of being able to write down how your thinking is about a particular idea or a particular thing that you've done in the past. Lots of data, lots of evidence. I think about it really a bit like when some of you at university or at school, when you did this, when you were writing at that sort of level, we're talking about that. So we're talking about, real detailed stuff. And it's really important that you're able to do that, certainly at the more senior levels. There is a decision point at this point where we take you into the interview, what we call a loop, which is effectively a panel of interviews, an individual assigned to each interview, 5 or 6, depending on the role, depending on the level of seniority. And then each interviewer is given a competency to use, which effectively is the Amazon leadership principles. So we have a bunch of questions that we ask in a bank of questions, and we can use those to ask questions. And we're really interested in whether the candidate has the right level of functional fit, capable of doing the job, but also Amazon cultural fit as well. And we use this and we use competency-based questions if you're used to it and you've had this kind of thing before, in order to really get the best out of the interview. We believe that the best indicator of future performance is what people have done in the past. So we extract really good examples of things that people have done in order to actually measure impact. We gather evidence effectively. That's how we do it. More on that later. So when we've done the interview process, we put our feedback in there in a system, and then we have a decision point to make. So each member of the panel that was on the loop itself, the panel will talk on a call for 30 minutes and have a chat about whether the person raises the bar or not. Okay, and we're trying to make a data-driven decision at this point. So we could go through some of the leadership principles, the main ones that are focused on the particular role, and really drive into the detail of whether the candidate is raising the bar or not over that period of time. The bar raiser leads this conversation, and then a decision is made at the end of a hire or a no hire. But we also make another decision. If it's a no hire, sometimes the candidate may or may not be the right functional fit, but could potentially be a great Amazonian, right, in a different role. So we would effectively recycle the candidate, as we call it, which is not a great term, but we would use that. And then we would go back to a point in the interview process where they perhaps would be interviewed again with a different hiring manager and a different bar raiser. But they wouldn't necessarily have to go back to the beginning with the phone screens and all that stuff. Okay, and then obviously, if the outcome isn't as you intended, you don't get the role, and then you're able to reapply to Amazon again after a few months' time. Okay, so we tend to use what we call, because it's competency-based interviewing, we tend to use the STAR process, right, which is situation, task, action, result. Now, told in the right way, actually, it's a really powerful way of telling a story, because that's really what you're doing when you're explaining an example of something you've done in the past, a really impactful task or initiative or a project that you've done at work, which has delivered like impactful outcomes to either the business or the customers, ideally the customer. Traditional interview questions tend to be, just walk me through your CV. What were your work responsibilities? Those kind of questions, which don't really get the best out of the candidate. Whereas at Amazon, we're very different at that. We ask for examples. Give me a time when you delivered an impactful result for a customer. You went above and beyond. Expectations for a customer, for example, is a good way to extract a really impactful example from an individual. And that's important. So situation, task, action, result. Have a look at it up online. It's quite a common thing, and you can obviously look at it up and have a look and see what that looks like. One of the things that we do at Amazon is always dive deep. So people are great. Some people are really good at telling stories, and they've got to expand it out and give a lot of context and things like that. But what we really want to do is peel the onion. Okay, and when we say peel the onion, we say, we like to probe. So people make statements and they say, yeah, well, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. And so we like to understand what that means, okay, by probing and diving deeper into some of the examples that we like to hear. And so what that means is that we ask the W questions, the who, the why, the what, the when, and the where, and the how question, okay? And we keep drilling into the scenario until we get the complete picture of responsibility. So you might have told a great story, but you were involved very little, or you might have told a great story, and it was all of your responsibility, okay? Some people are very good at telling stories, like I said. You need to get down to the level of detail in order to understand actual contribution of the individual when you're assessing, getting a data-driven outcome from the interview. You should be asking the question, what impact does the candidate have? Has it been to one person, to two people, or has it been to, over to a large number of people? And that's really important, okay, when you're assessing a candidate. And of course, what you're actually looking for is coming out in an interview and going, wow, this candidate's awesome. He's done amazing things, or she's done amazing things. And, and you think, we've got to hire this person. That's how you want to feel when you've had an interview. You don't always feel like that. okay, when you have an interview. If you feel kind of like, yeah, then obviously you know how you feel about it. Oops. There we go. Right. So never be on the fence, number 7, okay? What's important here is we have a voting system, right? That means that we can't be on the fence, right? Don't have a maybe. That's important because if you don't think that the candidate has wowed you, or has a particular customer focus, in our case, customer obsession, and the impact is pretty low, then you shouldn't really be inclined to hire the person. You should be a no. All right. If you're on the fence and say, this person could do the job, they've got a few years experience, but they just did their job. They didn't really kind of do that much outside of their role. Then is that raising the bar? Is that the wow factor? Probably not. Okay. So again, you would say no, but sometimes you would say it's a maybe, but we don't do maybe. We do a no. All right. And so that's important. Okay. You need to back up your argument when you're doing your written feedback, and when you're in the debrief, for example, or in the meeting afterwards, to actually substantiate all of the evidence that you've got for a candidate. It's really important, okay? And make sure that you get that data-driven decision about whether the candidate is actually raising the bar or not. Number 8, never compare candidates. Now, I've been around a few years now in the IT business, and when I've heard and what I've seen is that when somebody leaves a company, a lot of companies, what they do is they go out and try and find a replacement for that candidate, right, for that employee. And so they'll go out and they'll get 20 CVs, and then they'll pick 10 and then to review, and then they'll bring 5 in for an interview, and then they'll pick the best one of those 5. We certainly do not do that, because the 20 people that you've got CVs for could all be not great CVs, right? And so we don't do that. We don't compare candidates. So each individual candidate is assessed in its own merit, all right? So we never say, this candidate yesterday that we interviewed is much better than this one. We never do that. If somebody effectively passes the bar because they've got the wow factor and they demonstrate the leadership principles, then we make the hire. And I've certainly been in certain circumstances where we waited at least 18 months to find the right person. We don't make a hire for the sake of it, or pick from a bunch of people, because we never know whether we're going to get a bunch of bad ones. So, and always make sure the right decision is made. So this is where the bar raiser comes in. So these are the 2 elements that we use with regard to the bar raiser. We make this statement, as a bar raiser, you make this statement at the beginning of the call. We're here to assess the performance bar. Are they better than 50% of the current team? So when you look at the team of people that are doing the role today, it's a bunch of developers or whatever, are they impacting the team with new skills, new ideas, new experiences than the current team are providing? Okay? That's actually easy to do when you sit down and think about it, and you go, no. End of chat, right? They might be able to do the job, but are they bringing stuff that's new, impactful? Are they better than 50% of the team? So that's a functional element or performance element, okay? Where we measure long-term impact is through the leadership principles. So that is where a candidate can move through the organization to different spots, okay? So they might be awesome, right, at doing the job, but can they do other roles as well, okay? Because we don't expect somebody to say doing the same role of their whole career, okay? It doesn't work like that, and particularly as a fast-growing business like ours, roles and situations change very quickly. So we expect people to have the right sort of skills and to move around the business, and that's how we do it. We measure it through the leadership principles. So if there is definitely, so during the hiring decision, right, we assess uncertainty. How convinced are we that this person is raising the bar at 50% or have long-term impact? Okay, and the bar raiser is there to kind of draw out the data-driven decision, and then obviously we make the decision at the end of it. Okay, it's really important. So if you can, as part of your interview process, try and get a third party to come and sit in on your interview process. Okay, so it's not always easy to do that, because obviously we do this at scale, but do this yourselves. Find a third party, just at least to give an opinion. You might not have the sort of the bar raiser kind of veto sort of role within your business, but certainly have a third party that's not involved in the day-to-day of the business to come and give an objective viewpoint of the candidate. And lastly, and one of the most important ones, certainly from Amazon's perspective, is always give the candidate a great experience. It's a small world, as we know, and say for example in 2011, Airbnb, a great example of this. So in 2011, Airbnb grew from 50 employees to 500 in a year, and obviously the process was creaking. All right, and people were getting lost in the process. People were getting lost completely from one interview to the other. And so they hired a VP of recruitment to come in and who expedited a lot of change. And this is the actual post-it notes that they put up on the wall to actually, where they brainstormed how they wanted the candidate to feel at each point, right, along the process. And what could they do to interject interesting things for the candidate to do in between interviews, like things to read up on, tasks for them to do, on just extra communication that they could keep them warm, that kind of thing. So they were very aware, that the candidates needed to have the level of communication in order to stay warm over a period of time. Because I think we've all had experiences where the interview process for a company can take far too long. Well, we don't tend to do that here at Amazon. We get generally get the whole process done in a day. Well, the phone screens are done separately, but the interviews itself are done in a whole day. And then we have a thing called a 5-day feedback SLA, if you like, service level agreement that we have internally, which basically says we must get back to the candidate with a decision within 5 days. So that is something that we have as a part of our culture internally in order to make sure the candidate has a great experience when they're being interviewed, because we assume, at Amazon certainly, that they're Amazon customers. And even if you're running a B2B business, you don't know whether you're going to come up against that candidate again at some point, and what company they're going to work for if you've given them a poor experience. So it's really important that you do think about the candidate experience and really plan it out on a whiteboard, how you're going to make the candidate feel, even if the end result isn't what they intended or they wanted. So to recap on this, I'll talk you through why it's important, obviously, to have a solid hiring process, and why it should be backed up by a clear and concise understanding of your culture, right? So start from the culture and work backwards from that in order to build a process. And of course, I've given you hopefully some interesting 10 approaches or 10 best practices, if you like, and how Amazon does things, and give you a couple of examples of Airbnb, of how to hire the best candidates at scale and keep that bar extremely high. And I hope you enjoyed the talk, and thank you very much. Good. Now I'd like to invite up my guests on stage. We've got a panel now to talk about hiring and the challenges of hiring and retaining talent. So I'd like to welcome on the stage Sean Hunter from Oak North, Remo Gattini from Depop, and Jean-Marie Verdig. I always forget. Yeah, okay. So welcome our 3 guests. We're going to have a little panel now and we've got some interesting themes to talk about as well. So I'm delighted to welcome on stage. So hope you've enjoyed that, guys. Hope you learned something. So let's start a little bit. So mishires. Let's have anybody got an interesting story around a mishire that they want to share without too much details? Maybe to make the audience laugh.
Yeah, so I can start. So I interviewed a candidate, and it was really obvious right at the beginning that this person was just brilliant. She was really, really smart, like frighteningly intelligent, like really articulate, like incredibly driven, determined, etc. And there was a little bit of a niggling like thing at the back of my head. Not that, there's a sort of like a cliche about hiring brilliant assholes, but she was definitely not that. No, she was definitely not that. But she was like a really high drama type of person. And I think one of the things when you're a startup, you've got to really think about the dynamic of the team. And this person was, she would just freak out about anything. And it just caused so many problems. And it was, and by being super high drama, she actually turned all the rest of the team into like total prima donnas. So they would all, like in a little group, freak out about all sorts of things all the time. And one of the things about being a startup is, life is pretty chaotic. Everything changes all the time.
Yeah.
You're growing really fast. One day you've got a really great big office. Next day everyone's like sitting on each other's laps because you're so crowded. And like, you have to be people. You have to have team members who are pretty tolerant of change and like
Ambiguity, that ambiguous side of thing.
Yeah, so it was a terrible mishire, not because she didn't have the intelligence or the skills or the drive or determination, but just because she kind of caused this incredibly toxic spiral in the group that she was in.
Anybody want to add anything else?
Yeah, just on that point, we've had the only mishire I think we've had have been on culture. They're very, very seldom are on skills. So sometimes we'll hire for a role and then realize actually that person is not in the right role because they don't have the right skills. But if the culture is there, if they've got the right attitude in terms of resilience, because we're a startup and we're growing really fast, we'll always find something else where they can land and apply the skills better. But the culture element, if they don't have the right culture, or if they come from an environment where things were done in a certain way, but that doesn't work in our environment, that can turn into mishire.
Anything? No?
Similar.
Yes.
But more, and by the way, it was my fault.
Your fault. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the next question: is how you
I
think you
think
could
it's,
remediate, how you could actually, could have not done that, made that decision at the time. Could there have been things that you could have done to avoid that from happening?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I'm always aware that the majority, if not all, the responsibility falls on the shoulders of the hiring manager. So as a candidate, I offer what I offer, and I want to be open, is for you to understand whether, because I don't know what I don't know as a candidate, so you have to be aware of. But to make a long story short, my major failures happened when I transitioned from what I call enterprise IT into entertainment and multimedia. So I came from a world of highly structured, highly organized process into a world where creativity drove basically excellence, where from a product I went into an experience, and all of a sudden the process and the capabilities of every individual and every candidate manifest itself in a different way, quite a lot in cross-functional teams where creativity has a strong say on a matter. And I failed to understand that I was still using a blueprint that would work for mainstream IT, so for an IBM, for large organizations.
Yes.
And I had quite a few learnings before I understood the balance mix between skills and culture and experience, not product.
Yeah. And Sean, how do you feel that you could have mitigated against that risk? What did you learn from that experience from mishires, and how to avoid that from happening again?
Yeah, so this might be kind of personal, but there's two things in particular. So I'm very down with your no maybes. I also get very annoyed when somebody says, "Oh, maybe they're a
They could do the job.
You have to have an opinion." And I think there's two failures that I personally fall into, and I think I've seen it with other people. The first thing is not being well enough prepared when you go into interview a candidate. So if I go into interview a candidate, it's really important to just know two things and have them really, really clear in my head. So the one is like, what is it that I'm trying to establish about the person? Like, in other words, what is the role that I'm trying to hire, or what are the cultural attributes that I'm trying to determine from the, what am I trying to find out? And then like actually have a plan to find out those things. So in this particular case, and in all the interviews where I feel like I haven't done a good job, it's usually because I'm inadequately prepared. So I haven't really thought through, or I'm not in really tight sync with my colleagues around what we're trying to hire. And then the second one is I haven't really thought through what is the plan of attack to actually find out. So in this particular question, I had some history in common with this person. So I asked her a question that was not really to do with the role. We had a fascinating conversation, like really complicated mathematics and all kinds of crazy stuff. It had absolutely nothing to do with the role. And it meant that like I came out of the interview with data, but it wasn't data about whether or not she was going to be actually good at doing the job.
Right. Okay. So you didn't feel satisfied that you had all the information to make the decision properly.
Yeah. I didn't have any basis for making a good decision.
Yeah.
I would say that my major learning is about time. Ironically, we all know that organizations are purely a reflection they exist because of the people that are within the organization. Walls don't move anything. But in the past, if I reflected, it was between hiring and having your management meetings or whatever else. You always think, oh my God, I have to go into an interview now. But you're happy to spend 6 hours in any other kind of meetings. So what I've learned is to do exactly the opposite and say hiring, it's probably the top priority. To the point that even the organizations where I am now, in spite of all the beautiful plans that we have for growth for this year and everything else, I said for me the most important task for this year, at least for the first 2 quarters, is to come to work and practice what I preach, which is hire and spend the right quality time on this activity. So it's about time for me.
Okay.
It's reversing the priorities.
Lastly, Jean-Marie?
Yeah, I think for me, the main learning has been the importance of feedback. So the process you described, we probably don't have it to that extent, but we all have a stage at the end of the face-to-face interviews where everyone talks and give their feedback.
Yeah.
And with what you said before about the pressure on the hiring manager to grow the team, there's been a few times where we've noticed the people who were in the interview are pushed towards giving a positive answer, where actually that's really not what you want. As the hiring manager, you really want interesting feedback that will help you make a decision. And we've had this kind of weird feedback session where at the beginning, everyone but one person is really positive, it's an absolute yes. And then the last person to talk goes, yeah, I was a bit worried about that. And then the whole feedback session just turns around and everyone that was until now really positive then suddenly goes, oh, that's interesting, you pick up on that because I had that as well.
It was like 12.
And then suddenly it's a straight no where you were like, we're so close to a yes. So was the feedback really, like, was there some bias towards giving positive feedback, which really is not helpful?
So change the subject a bit around hiring and sort of, there's always the keeping talent, which is a big challenge, right? Especially in London, we have a very, very thriving startup business, and you're competing with the tech giants like Amazon and also all the others. How
do we compete with Amazon?
in terms of the hiring? Because everyone's like competing with we're getting the right talent, and that's an important thing. But you guys have got hiring responsibilities. Sean, you're the CIO. Remo, you're the CTO. CPO, is that your product officer as well?
I'm
or
also acting as a CPO.
CPO, acting CPO, and Jean-Marie, you're the the director of engineering globally for Babylon. So you've all got hiring responsibility. How do you think about keeping talent? What are the things that you do to retain talent at your respective businesses?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing, it's going to sound like a bit of a cliche, but like actually trying to understand the people.
Yeah.
And don't make assumptions about what they actually want to do and what a compelling future for them looks like. So I think this is really important for tech people. So I think a lot of businesses made the mistake of early on sort of falling into this thing of, hey, if you want to progress as a software developer, then there's like okay, you become an engineering manager, and then you become like some other kind of person, whatever. Like, and then it's or you go down the like becoming more of a nerd path where you like become an architect, and all you do is draw things on whiteboards, right? And I think actually really trying to understand what it is that make people tick and what a compelling future for those people looks like. So give them something interesting to do that they're going to care about that somehow intersects with whatever it is that your business is trying to do. So, like a lot of people really want to grow their own impact, and that's like a really positive character trait that you want to foster. So like think about what are the most impactful things that the person can do and how it can grow into that, rather than thinking about, hey, I've got to like invent a new title so that I can give some person a kind of meaningless promotion, which is kind of how people used to think about this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. To the point that career progression is something that today within a given craft is not any longer playing a key differentiating role, because this is provided by every organizations that you work in. So the differentiating factor between the technology that you use, the technology that we use is very minimal. So where do you make the difference? So I would like to think that we make the difference deep up in moving beyond what it is the craft and moving within the wishes and the wants and the aspirations of the individuals. So we would like to think that people come on Depop not only to master, raise the bar, and excel within their own craft, but also grow as people. So we look also at the psychological place. What makes you get out of bed and wanting to go to work beyond coding a Lambda function? I mean, there must be something more than that. And that's
quite cool.
No,
which is quite cool. And that's
Nothing
where
more than
we're
that.
trying to play. So we start to look at our colleagues as individuals that have aspirations beyond the craft and to a certain extent fulfill their lives.
Jean-Marie?
So I think we've got, so I'm from Babylon Health, and we kind of have an unfair advantage, to be honest. So our mission is to build an accessible and affordable health service and put it in the hands of every person on earth. So anyone that has a beating heart, that has a health, that has a parent, that has a kid, will buy into what we're trying to do. So we very often get people interested and get amazing talent based on the mission that we've got. Then in terms of retaining it, I think that's what you were saying, Sean, about as managers, it's a human business, right? So because we've got such an amazing mission, we bring in amazing talent. That's a really good drive for other people to join. You want to work with amazing colleagues. But then the way we keep them is by being respectful of that talent. So very often, people who join us, they're really good at what they do. They don't want waste. So the main thing you can do to drive attrition is if you don't give them an environment where they can be doing their best work. If you do that, if you are transparent with them, you're genuine, you give them the space, you give them the responsibility, then at some point they will leave, right? But that's just, they will have something else in their career. But very often they will stay.
So how do you close the deal with a really good bar-raising candidate when you're competing with others to get that talent on board? What are the compelling things that you throw on the table to get it over the line?
It's really interesting. I don't think we're closing the deal, to be honest. I don't think it's about us closing the candidate. It's really, very often, the conversation will take months. So Dominique is our developer relations. It took, I think, 5 months to get you on board. And it was absolutely at no point about closing the deal. It was, all the time it was having the conversation, again, that goes back to respect. It was about having the conversation about, this is where we are. What do you think you could bring to the table? Well, you could bring that. That would be really cool. Would you also do that? No, that's not really what I would do. And really putting together the jigsaw that makes it work.
Okay. Mima?
I tend to agree that to a certain extent, the moment that someone is willing to engage with your organization is probably already 60% there if the pre-work has been done. So I tend to emphasize, to fall back into my experience at DreamWorks Animation, where storytelling is critical. So as a Depop, we are basically, as you said, you call it the mission. We are crystal clear on the journey where we tell a story. And the moment that you tell a story, you go down beyond just the technology to the point that when candidates come on board, I tend to agree with you, unless there is a catastrophic failure for something that we might have had a blind spot, normally we tend to cross the finishing line. So the effort happens to be more at the front rather than at the back, at the end tail of the process.
Sure. So?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone said here. I mean, I think there's a few practical things for startups. I've had a few things a few times where the candidate has said, hey, I've got an offer from Google and I've got an offer from you guys, or, Amazon and you, or whatever, what should I do? And it's kind of interesting if the candidate is kind of actually asking me that question, because I kind of feel like, okay, they actually kind of want me to sell them to a certain extent. Like, otherwise, why are they even talking to me? So I deliberately resist the impulse to do that, just to be perverse. But I think part of it is, like, as a startup, is concentrate on what you've got that's special and interesting, because you're not gonna out-perk Google, right? Or whatever. So, like, and that person's gonna go home to their parents. Their parents will know who Google is. They don't know. Nobody knows who OpenAuth is. Likewise. So there's, like, lots of things that big companies have an advantage. So concentrate on the things that are interesting about your company. So, Babylon's got an amazing mission. So like, that's the kind of thing that if you talk to a candidate and say like, hey, we're trying to get healthcare, affordable healthcare to everyone in the world. That's an incredible mission. Like, so concentrate on the things that are special about what you do.
by the way.
Hey, well, so I'll send you the invoice. But so likewise, we have a really cool mission. So like, I think it's really important to concentrate on the things that are special about your company. Maybe you've got really amazing colleagues. So make sure that they meet all your really cool colleagues. Like, don't keep your kind of crown jewels hidden. Like, if the person's on the fence, like, get your amazing colleagues to just have a pizza with the dude or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, have the person, have he or she like meet the team, like really, really show the best face that you've got, because that's the kind of thing that will feel personal, will feel special, and like the candidate will think, hey, these guys are really taking me seriously, and so it's worthwhile. Like, so for developers, I always look at their GitHub. I read their code. If they've got blog posts, I read them. Like, if they're on Hacker News, I look at their comments. Like, this is just like really basic. Like, if I've been into an interview before and I've done a code review with a candidate, and I read her and I was like, hey, I thought your GitHub was really interesting. Let's go through some of your code. And like, she was really amazed. She said, like, no one's ever done that before as a code review. Like, normally people do whiteboard exercises, but it's like, think about what's special about your company, and that can really help.
Okay.
So one thing I would add to that is one thing that seems to work really well is that candidates get more and more savvy about smelling what doesn't feel true about your company.
Yeah.
So one thing we really careful of doing is always be super transparent about the things that work well, the things that don't work well. Like, we don't try to sell you a job where everything is perfect. Nothing is really perfect. There's a lot that needs to be done. And that seems to work really well.
I have a great story about that. So a friend of mine went for a head of engineering.
Is that it?
No, seriously, a friend of mine went for a head of engineering job at a Silicon Valley startup, and they said like the package was amazing, the team, people seemed really smart, and as he was leaving, the founder said to him, and if you don't like the team, just tell me and I'll fire everyone and you can hire your own team. And he was so taken aback. He was like, no way, this is not, and that was Theranos.
Really?
And it was like this really weird red flag. He was just like, that is psychopathic, like
Proper nutcase, yeah.
I should say that in an instant.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Because Jean-Marie did call you out. Can we have the microphone? You've got the microphone there.
Sorry, Dom.
Because the question was around, sort of closing the deal with a candidate, and you mentioned, Jean-Marie, that you had that 5-month conversation. What was it? So, what was your name again?
Dominique.
Dominique. So, Dominique, what was it about, working? What was it that closed the deal for you?
Do you want me to leave the room?
Yeah. As much as you want to share. As much as you want to share on this, of course.
Well, I suppose like it started with that I wasn't really looking for a job. So
Okay.
I host a bunch of meetups in London.
Yeah.
Organize a few conferences as well. And I reached out to him like, hey, I would like to host my meetup at your office. So went down there for coffee, and he was like, would you like to come work for me? So I was like, maybe.
But that was like day one of the 5 months.
That was basically like, okay, well, we'll have a conversation about that. And then it's like, I need to, like, how about this? We'll just go out, do our thing for a bit, give me a few months, and then we'll come back with something more tangible, find some budget and like create a role and everything like that. And throughout the whole experience, I've been, keeping in touch with him quite often. And then, like as soon as it got to an actual interview point, because I do have to speak to some people.
Yeah.
After that, everything went quite quickly. But it's just making sure everything was right, making sure everything was, perfect.
So this comes back to the point I made earlier about always be hiring, right? So because, even though you weren't looking, you were always thinking about the next hire. It just took a bit of time for you to warm up to the situation and moving, and then you made that decision, right?
Yeah, and there were like in my previous company, there were some projects I'm working on that I needed to finish first. So it was like when the decision was made, and like when everything was like, okay, now we're having the interviews, and after that it was pretty much sorted.
Again.
So
Okay, let's have another question from the audience. Let's mix it up a bit. So we have some pretty senior guys at high growth companies based in the UK. So anybody want to ask a question on their hiring process before we go back to the panel?
We have a lot of questions.
You'll have the microphone hold. You can do that.
No,
If
if somebody
nobody
else
else is...
wants to go,
Okay, we've got one behind you. Okay, you get your chance later.
In some ways, it's kind of easier to hire into a high growth.
Do you want to repeat your name and
Yeah,
from?
sorry, my name's Richard Marshall. I'm here to get some tips, I guess. In some ways, it's easier to hire into high growth where you have the money to hire and then you can find a role. What about when you're in a more constrained environment where you've got to hire for a particular role? Do you have any tips on doing that?
Yeah, so I have a pretty strong view, just don't ever do that. So, so the reason is, so obviously sometimes, you're thinking, okay, I've got to hire some developers, I've got a certain skill set. But the problem is always that as the clock ticks away on your deadline to fill the box or whatever, your standards are inevitably going to slip down. And there's a kind of like game theoretic problem around, wedding matches, where like, say you've got a cocktail party and how many people should you have a conversation with if you're just going to have like conversations and then marry someone, right? So it's a similar type of thing. Like, what's going to happen is your standards are going to just go down and down and down. And I think that's really bad for the long term. You might find a person who fits a particular box now, but it's really, really bad for the long term future of your company. And that's really important at the beginning, because I think especially when you start off, you've got to think through like every person that you bring on has got to be so additive to justify their spot, because you're really constrained on money. Every single, like especially for developers, which is what I know about. If you add one like weak link to the chain, it's such a problem for everyone else. And so I think just really resist the urge to do that, and really push back if people are saying to you, hey, you've got to hire like 20 devs or whatever, because you're just going to do a bad job. It's guaranteed. And then as long as you're out there, actively recruiting all the time, as you said, you will find that you don't get yourself in that bad spot so often, because you've probably got someone in the pipeline. Like say you desperately need a DevOps person for a particular thing. You've probably got someone who's in the pipeline right now who might be a good candidate or whatever. So I think it's just like try to resist the urge to hire for a role. Because the other thing is also, even if they fit that role, there might not be a forward trajectory for them. As your company grows, you're like, oh, I've got this one person, and they know they're not really a fit anymore. So I think that's something.
It's something that I can add on top is we are talking about technologists, obviously. Yeah, this is the environment. And hiring should always be done with an eye on what you can do for me, not what you've done. So to a certain extent, retrospectively looking at the CV, it's purely having a sense of what you've done in the past, but I want to understand what you can do for myself. And there is an element of stretch. So you want to hire someone that potentially for part of the job he hasn't done it. So if you put all these things together, all of a sudden the pool within which you can go and fish is much bigger than what you thought. And today we are talking about a new terminology, which is relatively new, which is full stack. I mean, 30 years ago, the concept of full stack didn't exist. We went through phases of functional decomposition that was reflected into the hiring that was forcing very strong verticals. Today, I have examples of individuals that I've hired that if you'd looked at the CV and what had been done up until the point, you would have never hired. But by identifying the potentials, it was only a matter of virtually weeks to a couple of months, and this person was able to perform. So my recommendation to you is absolutely have as a guideline the constraints that you have of the job, which might reduce your addressable market. But in reality, technologists today are much more malleable and they have potentials of growth. That if you throw these two ingredients into the equation and you look beyond what it is the definition of the job spec, you may find that you have more spaces to fish than you thought you would.
Jean-Marie, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to come back on your question. So before Babylon, a few few years ago, I was a founder. I was hiring for a very small company, so completely understand where you're coming from with it's very stretched. I followed what these guys did of not hire for a specific role, and I think looking back, I wouldn't have done anything different because if you're at that stage of the startup, you're probably also not quite yet defined, I would guess, on what you're going to do. So in my case, we started with a tech stack which was PHP and which was GCP at the time. Really quickly, it turned out that was the wrong choice. We should have looked at Python. We should have looked at AWS. Like if we had hired someone with specialist skills on PHP, we'd have been like, that would have blocked us. So instead, from the beginning, we hired for who is the right person for the kind of company we want. We want someone who is passionate about the technology, who is passionate about what we're trying to do if we use different technology. And that goes, at that stage of your company, you also need to be open to taking a lot more risks.
So there's a question for that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is an argument you hire different kinds of people at different stages of the business as well. Your question was around the early stage really, and now is your experience of hiring people different? You hire different people now than you did from back then, or what is the sort of dynamic around that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's true. So the cliche, which I think has got some truth in it, is like the earlier you are, the broader the skill space of the people you need and the more flexibility. And then like as you grow your team, you can afford to hire people who have much more deep vertical skills. I think it's also the case that as you grow your team, you're kind of hardening your tech stack or whatever. So your PHP example is like that's an example of a change that you probably wouldn't make in like year 4 of a company, right? But like in month 6, you realize, oh man, I've got the wrong tech stack, I need to change. So you can afford later on to get real vertical expertise because that person is going to have a job which is more about like doing one thing exceptionally well, rather than dev number 1 also has to set up the CI/CD pipeline, also has to be the sysadmin of all the boxes, has to learn Terraform in an afternoon to kind of stand up all the stacks, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Want to add anything, or there's a chap down there who wants to ask a question? Yes.
Yes.
Your name is
Fox. I'm Fox. So we don't have enough money to hire rock stars, so we need to hire people with potential.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. What's the best way to find a person that has a potential?
Yeah, so one of the things, sorry, I keep jumping in, sorry.
No.
So one of the things that I have this sort of personal theory, like, so the rockstar thing I think goes to what Grimo said of like past performance not necessarily being a guide to future performance. And I think what you're looking for is you're looking for the person that, when you expose them to gamma radiation, they're going to turn into the Hulk, right? And then necessarily they're not the Hulk when they walk into your office. So I think that's like, maybe that was too nerdy for this crowd. So like, you're looking for a person where when they put in an extremely stressful situation with a propensity for high personal growth, they're really going to rise to the challenge versus that breaking them, right? Sorry, that sounds kind of extreme, but and I think the rock star theory is like, hey, this person's going to just crush out code all the time, versus being someone who has a really demonstrated ability to learn. So I tend to bias towards looking for people who have a lot of interesting background, real propensity to learn. They've gone deep on a couple of topics. So for example, someone doesn't necessarily have to be a CS grad. I'm not a CS grad, but I think they have to have a deep propensity to learn something really well. So then I can have some conviction, okay, this person really knows how to go deep on a thing. And then I look for the motivation. So they can do it in terms of
how do you identify that though? I think how do you sort of, if you're sitting in front of somebody you've not met before, then how do you extract that potential capability out of that candidate?
So I actually think that's one of the easiest things to interview for, because usually if you've got the right person. So, I mean, I remember I interviewed a guy when I worked for Palantir, for example, and I asked him one question about his master's thesis, and an hour and a half later, the walls were just covered with equations, and like all the glass had little diagrams on it. He was just incredibly passionate about his topic, and I didn't know anything about his subject matter whatsoever. But it was super interesting, and it was so obvious that this guy, yeah, totally, and he was a rock star, 100%. Like, and I think it's I think the right person, they will really divulge that pretty quickly.
I mean,
And how do you identify
so-
those, those people, those that have got potential?
Yeah, to a certain extent, and that's where probably the looking backwards gives you a sense. So
Yeah.
the trail that has been left behind, or the breadcrumbs, have to be an element of identification. But answer your question, if you're not looking for a rock star and you are at the early stage, the first thing you have to look for a partner, so someone that really wants to share the pain, the ups and the downs with you, even before sharing anything about the technology. And in terms of technology, I agree with my fellow colleagues here. Technology changes. I mean, one of our major challenges is that basically every 6 months, something new comes into the equations, and by my God, is the business, and we have to embrace it. So being able to deal with change today, being able to be very iconoclastic towards your own career, chuck it in the bin and start with something new, is probably something that we definitely want. So look at the breadcrumbs, look for a partner. You can't afford
A partner in the
stuff.
sense of like, someone co-founder or, someone that's going to have a chunk of the business as part of the hiring process.
Absolutely, just not just from a legal point of view, but from an understanding of what's in front of them in an horizon that can be measured up to really 12 to 18 months, because then you ought to be into the next phase where this problem is not necessarily any longer a problem. But he knows clearly that in the next 12 to 18 months, there is a certain a journey that he will have to go together, and what that will mean from a responsibility point of view, because he carries, obviously, he will bring technology, expertise and experience, and he will understand the ups and downs as well as the challenges and the opportunities that we'll be going through for 18 months. So that's your horizons, really, and then it's a totally different chapter, basically, for you.
Jean-Marie, how do you identify potential?
Just one thing, because there's two questions that seem to make the assumption that we pay a lot of money to get rock stars. We've got Dom, but we also have Will, so you might have a microphone in a few minutes. But within our recruitment team, we absolutely do not pay crazy money. I don't think we got any candidate through the door on the basis of, oh, that's the place where we really make a lot of money. We pay decent money. We're having good salaries for the right compensation. We've got equity. We've got all that kind of stuff. We absolutely don't pay stupid money. So if in your mind you think, oh, once we will get bigger, we'll have all that crazy money, we definitely wouldn't.
Do you think that's down to creating that compelling sort of culture, that being able to sort of message that very articulately?
Yeah, so
it becomes a place where people really want to work, as opposed to having to throw money at the problem.
I think there's two reasons we don't do that. There's one, just common sense, right? We have money from our investors. I don't think they want us to just spend it on, well, we've sold recruitment, we just triple all the salaries. And two, that would attract the wrong kind of candidates. We want candidates to really buy into the mission. The way, and that's kind of what you were saying, Remo, before, the way we identified whether the people are the right people for the company is to be brutally honest about what the job is going to be like. Just going, this is what you're going to have to solve as a challenge. Very often, the candidates where you're like, I kind of have a feeling that person doesn't really have the chops to do the job on a day-to-day basis. Once you expose them to, we expect you to do that probably in month 1, then in 3 months we'll expect you to have done these kind of things. How do you feel about that? Very often the candidate themselves just go backtrack and just go, well, okay, if that's what you're going to expect, then.
What is quite interesting about this money issue, and it fits very well in the hiring like a unicorn, and how we had to change the tune and the strategy, because it is a fact, and it's true that the arrivals on the scene of London of the likes of Amazon and Google, the big ones, the big guys, has polarized a certain thinking of technology and has formed a center of excellence in London for with regard to technology, but at the same time has created an enormous amount of issues in terms of raising the bar to certain levels of expectations that they strangling right now the world of the startup. So it's basically having the opposite effect, because obviously people tend to, it's absolutely true, we do the same, we tend to sell a story, but I also see, and it's a fact, I see a lot of people that at the end of the process or halfway through the process, they have these benchmarks and expectations of these. So it forced basically startups to hire like a unicorn to shy away from money and basically build very, very strong stories and get people on board. Absolutely, because if we had to purely compete on the money, and I'm observing carefully what that means for the landscape in general, because at the moment, I reflect on this every day. Startups are finding it more and more difficult. So to a certain extent, what happened, there was more fertility on the ground for startups pre-arrival of the big ones than there is today, because today we are struggling, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
So it's a big question mark on how we can probably team up in order to be able to reignite the world of startups in London.
What about, last question for me, and I'll ask a couple of questions in the audience. So one of the things that I get asked a lot is about sort of when to hire. So like the forecasting of hiring and, perhaps when you have to make those really tough decisions and, take headcount away as well. So what are your, what advice do you have to an audience of like budgeting and planning for the hiring of their business?
I'd be happy to have some answers on that one, because in terms
you
of
can start with that one. Go on.
Forecasting hires is definitely something that we only starting to do. And I've been with Babylon for nearly a year. We've forecasted, but whether the actuals have met this forecast or not.
Yeah, is that because you are hiring, like, perhaps I talked about around the sort of you finding the right person and bringing them on board, finding a home for them, or what is the
No, I think
what is the approach
that's what
today?
Remo was saying before. Hiring is the most important thing you can do, right, as a business.
Yeah.
So, and it's tied into everything else, and it kind of requires everything else to be predictable, where in a startup, a lot of it is not predictable. So
right. In terms of the growth of the business.
Exactly. The markets will be in, the clients will be working with, the funding we will have. Everything is constantly changing, and all of that has an impact on your ability to forecast accurately.
Yeah, so we take a somewhat contrarian view, which is like we don't do that. So we don't forecast, we don't have budgets, etc. for a bunch of reasons. And I think it's a bunch of them are the things that you said, which is you've got to be realistic when you're a startup. The world changes all the time. So every week, every month, you're getting new clients. You're making changes to how you do things, etc. So if you kind of start the year thinking, oh, I'm going to have a year-long projection like a Walmart or something, and I have a very stable forward view, it's just going to be so wrong by the time you get to the second quarter even. And I think the danger of like a hiring forecast for an early stage company is, if you go to some tech manager and you say, okay, your hiring budget for the year is like 6 people, blah, 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 then all of a sudden it sets an expectation, and if you have to change tack, it's very, very painful. And I think the problem is a lot of managers will start to see their own importance in terms of their own budget and their number of people, and I'll be like, I'm more important than her because I've got more people, and like all of that. So we just don't do any of that stuff.
My experience is that it follows the life cycle of an organization.
Right.
So a 0 to 1, by all means, you are living hand to mouth. The shortest path between strategy and execution is the distance between your whiteboard and the desk where you're coding. It's clearly a known planning exercise. But as soon as you move beyond the one, so you start to go seed into a round A, round B. I'm blessed of representing an incredible organization that is behind me. I shine because they are who they are. Sure. And we've been blessed by a community that is taking us through the roof. For us, it's very, very, it's a process that we go through very carefully and very pragmatically. So we pair product roadmap with existing workforce. We have clear targets by quarter of what we have to hire. But again, it's because of the life cycle, it's because of where we are as an organization. So my recommendation to you is 0 to 1, don't worry about it, just be cozy. Past the 1 as you go through your first proper seed of investment, you should start to strive to do that for a number of reasons. One, because you have to, because investors will ask you how you're going to spend your money and in terms of head count. And 2, because it's a good exercise to make sure that you hire the right people, that you place the right people on the right effort that will make the difference to your company. Always be on a hiring mode doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a roadmap or a framework. I think it's an evolution from 0 to 1, nothing, then you move it into a blueprint, then you have a framework, and then you have a proper plan. And each one of them gives you the elasticity and the space to be able to be more or less precise in the numbers.
Okay. Should we have a couple of questions from the audience? Dominique's been desperate to ask a question, so let's...
Already desperate, just curious.
Curiosity. Back the microphone's gone. No. We get the last one.
Hi, yeah, so I'm the tech lead at a fairly small fintech company. We have about 15 people, and recently someone left. And so my question is about retention, but I guess also about kind of leadership and management here. When someone leaves, obviously that hurts the morale of the team. How do you go about retaining your remaining employees and making sure that no one else kind of leaves out of the morale? Because obviously people meet for a pint at the end of the week, and they'll be like, "Oh, why are you still working at that company?" kind of thing. But you can't stop that. They're just humans. But what can you do to kind of help build morale or rebuild morale after someone leaves?
Sure. I can try to. If morale goes down, it's because you start to undermine one key element, which is trust in what you're doing. So if someone has left, it's a trust issue. If the remaining have trust in what they are doing, what the organization is doing, what the mission is, you have less of a problem. If you think about trust and how you define trust, one of the 3 pillars of trust is authenticity, the other one being logic, and there is another one which is being empathetic. So I would suggest to you, use 3 weapons. Be logical in the explanations of why this individual has left. If it is 17 of you, there is no need for a red book and over-engineering on politics. He or she has left because these are the reasons, unless there are obviously personal ones that you keep under the wraps. The second one, be empathetic. So feel how they feel. Sit down with them and say, I feel your pain. I've been in that position. But let's together make sure that one less, it doesn't mean that what we believe into it is gone. And the last one, be authentic. So be yourself, stay where you are, and people will continue to follow. So it's not an issue of elements of variability within the reasons that is left, but it's about thinking about how do I make sure that they have trust in what we're doing. And there are 3 key elements that you can play around with those.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
That was a really good answer.
That was good.
Yeah,
That was
fantastic.
like very structured. Would you like to give the microphone to Dominic at the front? Last question. Everybody's on the edge of a seat now. It's like.
So this might be a bit of a scary topic, but I would like to know what initiatives you're taking to ensure the diversity and inclusivity of your teams, not just for gender, but also neurodiversity.
Yeah, so what,
gender?
but also for
Neurodiversity.
neurodiversity, yeah.
I've got ADHD, and throughout my professional career, I've always struggled finding an employer that has encouraged or empowered me to just be me. I've always been told things like, "Oh, you're just gonna have to deal with it," or stuff like that. And at Babylon, I feel like it's been, I can just be myself, and I feel like I don't have to be different. I'm just, So I would like to know, how are you incorporating do you incorporate anything in your hiring process that encourages people of all shapes and sizes? Because one of the things I've noticed is most startups will hire programmers. I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So are you doing anything at all? Or are you taking certain initiatives?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are really important there. So the one is like, think about your sources of candidates, because there's often a really very, very, very strong unconscious bias. So, and one thing is like, people will, referrals of friends is obviously a good way to get people, but it's also a good way to get people who are very similar to the people you've already got. And the danger is you get a monoculture over time. And like, recruiters are absolutely terrible for this. Like, I remember having a conversation once with a recruiter to say like, hey, dude, you sent me one guy, and then you sent me 210 CVs that were exactly the same as that guy, and you sent me one female candidate in that 211 CVs. And it's one of these things that I think recruiters have this mindset very frequently where if they place a candidate, they will send you a bunch more people that's exactly like that. And as a leader in an early stage company, one of the things you've got to think about is how does each person augment, right? So you don't need someone that's just identical to the candidate you just hired. You just hired her, she's there, so you don't need someone exactly like that. So I think, being very, very frontal with that about recruiters, thinking actively about your sources, making sure you have a wide diversity of sources. This also goes to the question about playing to your strengths as a startup, by the way, because as an example, like all of the big tech companies, I don't know about Amazon, but they all recruit from the exact same universities in the UK. If you go to Leeds University or whatever, you have a massive advantage, right? Because Google can't be asked to go to Leeds. They'll go to Imperial College, they'll go to Oxford, they'll go to Cambridge, and that's it. So like, think about these things, get a, and I'm just picking on Leeds as an example, but like, of a place where people in London probably can't be bothered to travel to go and recruit. So I think, think about the sources of candidates, because that's the top of your funnel. And then also think about the stages in your recruitment process and whether those things are introducing bias filters. Because if you're getting too much of monoculture of candidates in the top of the funnel, and then you're also weeding out anyone who's not identical to someone who's already in a role, that's a real problem. So like, I think, the thing you said, which was kind of interesting, is the concept of like zero basing around the candidate, not like saying, hey, I'm going to compare this person to some other person. Just thinking about like, hey, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this particular candidate? And I think those things, if you do them very rigorously, can actually help a lot.
At Depop, I have to say I'm extremely proud by what we have been doing, what we are doing, and I know that we will be doing even more. So what do we mean in practice? Our talented people organization has been relentlessly driving changes in the way that we write a job spec, changes in the rules and regulations that we have in hiring, going beyond the port of call to find a top of the funnel or a sorting that absolutely represents the best that can be in the UK and beyond, irrespective of any attribute that is not solely related to potentials, capabilities, aspirations, and skills. We have talent, people in talent that keep me as an executive and the rest of the executive in check every day to make sure that we live and are an examples or legs of these principles. And the workforce at my organizations, if you walk through, okay, we are in fashion, so by definition, so we attracted people that of all genders and everything else because of the type of industry. So we have a little bit of an advantage. But we emphasize this because we know that that is our sustainable advantage to have diversity within the organization. So people in talent are phenomenal at doing this, but the ones that are the most phenomenal are the employees. Because during the QAs, outside of the QAs, on the monthly surveys that we are virtually reminded of our own obligations and duties of making sure that we do everything that we can do to get to where we are. And I have to say that Depop is quite a unique place. I've been in Europe. I come from a 6 years experience in Los Angeles. So I've just moved 6 months ago, where for us, D&I, diversity is the name of the game. I used to work in creative industry, DreamWorks Animation, Riot Games. So for me, I don't know any different. To the point that I had to fight them because it became nearly a black spot. What do you mean you don't have women or anything else in the company? But here we are very, very solid. Depop is very, very strong in the space, and we will continue to look at ourselves in the mirror and make sure that what we do tomorrow is even better than what we do today in the space, to give everyone an opportunity.
Jean-Marie, finally?
Yes, I think we do two things depending on the level. So as a company, we do all the D&I things. So the writing the job spec in a way which is not gender specific, and all having the policy. We've got groups on Slack which are from different communities. Sure, that's the company thing that every company does. Maybe a bit controversially, at a team level, we do absolutely nothing. And we do that by design. So for me, that's a bit the same as do the people come in at the right time and leave at the right time? That's a really good symptom of your culture. So throughout the recruitment process, we've got all kind of people with neurodiversity, with gender diversity, all these kind of things. There's not been one time where that featured as that's negative feedback on the candidate. Mm-hmm. And actually, when the only time I can vaguely remember something like that, so we've got as part of our recruitment process, if the salary of a candidate is above a certain threshold, we need to have a conversation with the CEO even now. And at some point in that feedback conversation, just as a passing comment, someone said, "Yeah, that person is really good. She's really introvert, but she's good." That's probably the only time in one of these sessions that I've seen our CEO just stop the conversation and just address the point that being introvert is absolutely fine. There's probably too many extroverts that are in power, in position of power. It's absolutely fine if the person wants to be like that. So I think as a team, we don't have something in the process that ensure that D&I is addressed. We just monitor that as a key part of our culture.
There was one, sorry, just
Does
like...
that make sense? Or, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
Yeah.
There was just one thing I wanted to jump in, because you said about neurodiversity, and I realized I didn't say anything about that. But like one thing as a manager, it's really important when you manage your group to think about different sort of types of people and how they think and how they respond in groups and so on. Because I think like a lot of management styles allow certain types of people like extroverts to really dominate and don't actually take the time to bring out the best of all their people. And it's not just people who are neuroatypical or whatever. Like I think you have to really think about your people and like what's the way I get the best out of this person. And if a certain person doesn't seem to be contributing, for example, say you've got a stand-up and you've got a person who never speaks in the stand-up or whatever, just call them, take them out for coffee or whatever, have a chat. Is everything cool? Is this a thing that you find hard? Do you not like speaking up in front of a group? Or like, because I think, if you see it as a problem you have to unlock, a little bit like writing code or like a thing to solve, like how do I get the best out of each person? You'll find you become a better and better manager over time. And at the bare minimum, you're at least being empathetic because you're trying to put yourself in their shoes a bit and trying to understand what makes them tick. And I think that really goes a long way, because I have certain things that really bug me, for example, that I realize in terms of my brain style or whatever, like other people don't even realize that they're driving me crazy in certain situations, right? And I think we all probably have some sharp edges like that. So I think it's just, really think about those things.
Okay, I think it's a great time to stop there, actually, because I'm getting told we've got plenty. We want to leave plenty of time for networking. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Sean, Remo, and Jean-Marie. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. So we've got networking now, which is actually not down here. It's actually up on our 9th floor, which is has a lot more kind of windows and than it does down here, which will be like, but the challenge is obviously it's quite a secure building, so we need to take, and obviously we've only got a certain number of lifts that go up to that floor, so we need to be patient, please, but we do really want every